Matrix and welcome to Was a Matrix. Today we're doing our history exam guide. My name is Looney and I will be assisting you to get all of your questions through to us. All you need to do is follow us on social media, Was a Matrix, and hit us up on our WhatsApp line. There's tons of competitions and fun stuff, so do stay tuned for some more details. I'm never alone. With me are Mamsi and our sign language interpreter, Keta. Over to you guys.
Welcome, grade 12 learners. As Looney has already said, we are focusing on history today. We are giving you an exam guide to help you succeed in your history exam. I hope you will enjoy this. So, what we're going to do is we're going to start by looking at what your history paper 1 exam is going to look like. I hope you have all studied and you know the content very, very well, okay? But this is just to add to the content that you already know. Now, let's look at what your paper 1 history exam is going to look like. So, first of all, your paper is out of 150 marks and it's 3 hours long. Now, that is very, very important. Later on, I'm going to show you the different sections that are contained in this exam or in this paper. So it's very, very important for you to see how you can divide the 3 hours that you have. And remember, on top of that, you have the reading time as well. So it's very important to use all that time wisely. It's 150 marks for 3 hours. And as you can see, there are 2 sections. There is Section A and Section B. Now let's move on to Section A. Section A of your history paper consists of 3 source-based questions. That means it's source analysis questions. So there will be source material that is required to answer these questions that can be found in the addendum. That is the source booklet that will come with the question paper. So you will have a question paper and then you will have the source booklet. And then if we move on, if we look at the division or the breakdown of Section A, it consists of question 1, which is the Cold War, containment and brinkmanship, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then there is question 2, which is independent Africa. The case study is Angola. Question 3 is civil society protests from the 1950s to the 1970s, the Black Power movement. Now, guys, it's very, very important. As you can see, all these themes and topics are based on your CAPS curriculum. And it's very important to know what is examined in which paper, because you don't want to walk into the exam room having studied something that is not in the correct paper. Okay, don't go there thinking you're going to write the content that will be in history paper 2. Remember, this is paper 1. So when you're studying the content, focus on the paper 1 content. Okay, so that is your Section A. Now let's move on. Section B consists of 3 essay questions. So, as I did with Section A, I'm going to show you the different topics that are contained in Section B. That is your essay topics. So, if you look at Section B, question 4, the case study is China. Question 5, it is independent Africa. So, there is a comparative case study there of the Congo and Tanzania. And then question 6 is civil society protests from the 1950s to the 1970s, the civil rights movement. So again, guys, as you can see, this is very, very important because remember I told you that for Section A, which is a source-based section, you'll find the civil society protests, but the focus there is the Black Power movement. And then for Section B, which is the essay section, the same topic, civil society protests, the focus there is the civil rights movement. So when you are studying and preparing for your exams, you should know what to expect. Okay, let's move on to the choices. Now, it's very, very important to read instructions carefully when you get into your exam, Because if you don't read instructions and you don't do what you are told to do, that will cost you marks. And you don't want to lose valuable marks. Now, let's look at the instructions that are found in your exam paper. You have to answer 3 questions. One must be a source-based question. One must be an essay question. So you can't walk into an exam thinking, I don't like essay writing, or I find it very difficult, therefore I'm only going to focus on source-based questions. No, you are expected to write at least one source-based question and then one essay. And then for the third question, because remember earlier I told you that you have to answer 3 questions in this paper. That is why it is 3 hours long. So one can be a source-based question, the other one can be an essay question, and then when it comes to your third choice, the third question may be either a source-based question or an essay question. So there, it's up to you. If you feel that you're not very strong in essay writing, then maybe you can choose the source-based. But whatever choice you make, remember that there are different topics that you can choose from. Please make sure that you choose a topic that you know very well, a topic that you've studied. Don't go into the exam and read the different questions and think this one question sounds better than the one I've studied, therefore I'm going to choose that one. It doesn't work. Always choose the question that you know you can answer. That will be the content that you will have studied. Okay, now let's move on. Time management is very, very important. I've already told you that this paper is 3 hours long, so the suggestion is that you spend at least 1 hour per question. And you have to use your reading time very well. If you already know which topics you're going to answer, there is no need for you to go and read the entire paper. You need to go straight to those choices that you will have already made. I've already shown you what the topics are, so you know what they are. You don't need to read the entire paper. You can only do that if you're still undecided. And then you use the reading time to read the sources, because we know that there is a lot of reading in history, and those source questions tend to have very, very long sources sometimes. So you need to spend your reading time reading through those sources so that you understand them very well. And remember, you cannot answer a question very well if you've only read the source once. You will have to read it again when you've seen the questions. Okay. And then another important thing is to look at the mark allocation for individual questions. Okay. The mark allocation guides the type of answer you are likely to give. Because obviously, if the mark allocation is 1 or 2 marks, you know how much you need to write. That's different from a question that is worth 6 marks. Then you know that you will have to write more for that question. So, as I said before, guys, it's very important to read the instructions to see exactly what you're expected to do, but you also need to look at the mark allocation because those two go hand in hand. That is very important. Don't forget that. Okay. When answering questions, you should apply your knowledge, skills, and insight. You cannot just walk into a history exam not having studied. I know there's this misconception that you don't have to study for a source-based paper. You do have to study for it because you have to understand those sources in context. And also, there will be questions that require you to use your own knowledge. So not all questions are comprehension questions. Okay, so don't forget, study hard and you will be fine. Okay, so you apply your knowledge, skills, and insight. You will be disadvantaged by merely rewriting the sources as answers. So in other words, don't just repeat the sources. So remember, they are already there in your paper. So what you need to do when you're answering is you need to show that you understand them. You need to show that you can analyze and evaluate them. Okay, we will come back to those instruction words later on. But it's very, very important that you understand that reading sources does not only require you to rewrite the information. It's deeper than that. Okay. So I hope that helps you understand the structure of your paper and the different topics that are contained in your paper. Okay, after the break, we are going to look at the examples of some of the questions that you're likely to get in an exam so that you know exactly how to study for them. Over to you, Luni.
Thank you so much, Mamsi. I hope our matrix are taking in all the information and preparing themselves for the exam. Guys, we are going to take a very short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break, Matrix. If you have just joined us, we are doing your exam guide to help you prep for your upcoming exam. If you've ever run out of data while online searching for some educational content, then this next competition is exactly for you. Waza Matrix is bringing you #WazaWinner competition, where 2 Matrix stand a chance to win 2 gigs of data. All you need to do is head on over to our Facebook page to see all of the details and enter the competition. Let's not waste any more time. Let's head straight back to Mamsi.
Thank you, Luni. Welcome back, guys. I hope you enjoyed the first segment where I gave you tips on how to choose the different questions in your history exam. So we're going to carry on. I'm going to give you more tips on how to answer questions in your exam. Okay. So now we're starting with answering a source-based question. Remember, before the break I told you that it is important to read and follow instructions. If you do that, you will never go wrong. Okay, and then the understanding of content is also very, very important. So remember I told you guys about time management as well, that during your reading time, what will help you is reading all those long sources that are contained in your source booklet. Make sure you understand the meanings of different words. Okay, in most cases, there is a glossary of terms, difficult terms that will be given, but there will be some concepts that a history student is expected to know. So you need to spend the time reminding yourself of what those different words mean. That is very important. And then another thing is you have to use your own words when answering questions. That goes back to the point about reading instructions. So if you're reading a source and they ask you to give a definition of a historical concept, what will happen is that the definition will not be contained in the source. Or if it is contained in the source, it will be contained in a different way. You have to use your own words to show that you understand the meaning of that concept. Please don't just repeat the words of the source unless the instruction tells you to do that. If the instruction says, quote from the source, that means you are just writing the words as they are. However, when you are expected to interpret, then you have to use your own words. That is very important. Okay. Now, you have to know the meaning of instructions like compare, analyze, and evaluate. Okay, there are more instruction words that are likely to be used in an exam. I'm just giving you some examples here. I'm not saying that every question you will get will require you to compare, analyze, or evaluate. However, these are the skills that you are likely to find in a history exam because we know historians like doing those things. So, for instance, if you look at the first one, when you're asked to compare, obviously they are asking you to give similarities. So don't go and look for differences when you are asked to compare. Okay, if they are asking for differences, they're going to say to you, contrast. Compare and contrast, then you are giving both similarities and differences. And then the next one, when you analyze, that means you now look at the source, you interpret it, okay, you break it down to come up with your own informed conclusions based on that source. Again, it goes back to a point I made earlier about not rewriting the source. You are not quoting directly, but you're analyzing. So in history, when you're analyzing, that means you are providing meaning to things. So if you have, let's say, a speech or a visual source, then you are giving meaning to it. And you are saying, this is what the writer, the author of this source was trying to say. Okay. And then when you're evaluating, now that is the one skill that most historians struggle with. When you're evaluating, and the question will tell you that you need to look at things like the origin of the source. Who wrote the source? When was the source written? Those are very important. What was the purpose of writing the source? And then you cannot leave out the value and limitations of the source. Now, the value of the source refers to the good things about the source. So what are the good things that we can get from reading this source? And then the limitations of the source, as the word suggests, will be the shortfalls of the source, the limitations. Like you'll be looking at things like the source is biased or one-sided, therefore it cannot be trusted. Or this source was written long after the event, there was the likelihood of memory loss and all those things. Okay, but we will obviously come back to these skills when we look at the actual examples. So now, guys, remember I told you when you're evaluating, the main things to look for are the origin of the source, the purpose or intention, the value, and limitation. If you don't look at all those 4 things, you are not going to get full marks. That is very, very important. Make sure you know and understand what is meant by all those things. And different sources obviously will have different limitations and different values. One thing I need to tell you before we move on to more tips is that when you look at sources in history, they all contain value and limitation. You must never ever say this source is only valuable and it has no limitations. That is not true. All sources contain value and limitation, and all that depends on what the source is being used for. Okay, so don't forget that, guys. Now let's move on. And then another thing is you have to recognize the different types of sources. So if you look at the past papers, because that is another thing you have to do, guys, is you have to work through the past papers just to see how the questions get asked. Obviously, they will not repeat the exact same questions as, say, last year's exam. However, you will get an idea of what type of questions to expect. So it's very important that you know that there are textual sources and there are also visual sources. And there are different things you need to look for in those sources when you are analyzing and evaluating them. That is very important. Also, it's very important to note that there is a difference between a photo and a cartoon. So when you're answering questions, you have to be mindful of the type of source you are dealing with. Okay, and then the next thing is you have to read those sources carefully. As I said before, that you have to understand them. Comprehension is very important because you will not be able to analyze and evaluate if you cannot even understand what the source is saying. Okay, and that understanding, again, as I said before, will be based on your prior knowledge as well. So studying is also very important so that you can read that source in context of what you already know about the event. And then you have to highlight the key phrases or key words. That is very important when you are reading a source. And what I would do if I was writing an exam is to read the sources first before I read the questions and try to put myself in the shoes of a teacher and say, what type of questions would I ask from this source? What are the important things? So you'd have to look at things like the key figures, that is the people. So look at the names of the people, highlight or underline them. You look at the dates, okay? You look at the events. And then another very important thing in history is cause and effect. So in the source, they can tell you that this is what happened and it led to this. So those things are likely to be asked in the questions. So that is what you need to do. Underline and highlight all those important things. Places as well are very important. So I said it's people, it's the dates, and places where events took place. Okay, and then you have to identify the origin of the source. Now, the origin of the source normally comes from the caption. So the caption before you even read the source will help you when it comes to evaluating the source, because that caption will tell you what the source is, when it was made, and who made it. So it's very important that you don't just go straight to the source, but you start reading the caption. The captions are there for a reason, okay? And they will help you to answer those questions. Very, very important, guys. So let's look at the example of a text-based source. I'm not going to read the entire source here, guys, but I'm just going to highlight what is important. As I said to you, it's very important to read the caption. Now, let's read this caption together. It says, the source below outlines why Cuba became the focal point of the Cold War. So now, if you look at this, it says why. This is very important. So you already know, even before reading the source, that it's going to give you reasons why Cuba became the focal point of the Cold War between the United States of America and the Soviet Union, and it tells you that it's in the 1960s. So already you have a lot of information that you can use in the answer just from reading the caption before you read the actual source. Okay. So now let's move on to the actual source. As I said to you, we are not going to read the entire source, but I'm just going to show you some of the things that you will have to highlight. So you can see here they've included Batista, very important. You have Fidel Castro, very important. You have the date here, the 1st of January 1959. All those things are important. And then it also tells you here that the U.S. president, I'm going to start here where it says U.S. president was Dwight Eisenhower. You already know that. The vice president, Richard Nixon. All those are important things that you would have to highlight because, as I said to you, you will be expected to use them when you're answering your question. Okay, and you need to bear in mind when you're highlighting and underlining, bear in mind what the source is about. Remember when we were looking at the caption, we said it is looking at why Cuba was the focal point. So when you're reading the source, you need to be looking for all those reasons why Cuba was the focal point of the Cold War. Okay, now this is the next part of the source. Tells you that in 1961, J.F. Kennedy, so that's another one that we need to underline, became the President of the United States. So this is now going to be another key figure that you will have to remember. Okay, then another date here is April 1961. Don't worry about the figures, even though they can be asked. They're very, very easy to spot when you go back to the source. And then the Bay of Pigs, that is also very important in the context because you don't know if there's going to be a question asking you about the Bay of Pigs invasion, what happened there. And that will help you understand why the United States and the USSR were fighting over Cuba. What was the importance of the Bay of Pigs incident? Those things are very, very important. Okay, let's move on to the rest of the source. Okay, so there is another figure that we introduced to here, that is Nikita Khrushchev. So again, it tells you what you did here, that Castro turned to Nikita Khrushchev for protection against future U.S. aggression. So obviously you can see that he was from the USSR because the caption did tell you that Cuba was the focal point of the Cold War between these two superpowers, the United States and the USSR. Okay, I hope you understand, guys. At the end of this source, it tells you where it came from. Okay, so this is the book titled The Cold War by D. Murphy. Now, when you're evaluating the source, you do not need to worry about this information. The information that is going to help you to give you the origin, purpose, value, and limitation will be found in the actual caption. So don't worry about this. This is normally put there to protect the examiner to show that they have not plagiarized. That is where they got the information from. So what is important for you guys is to read that caption as I said before. Okay, I hope you've understood everything. Okay, guys, so now I'm going to show you an example of a question that you're likely to get in the exam. Now, remember I told you earlier that it's very important for you to know the concepts and also to use your own words and also to use your time wisely. So during your reading time, when you're reading the sources, it's also important to read the questions. Because remember, I told you that you cannot just read the source once and understand it. So once you've read the sources and then read the questions, you can then go back to read the source again, and this time around, you'll be reading the source with the questions in mind. So when you're reading it, you will be looking for the answers to your questions. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So if we look at this one example here, it says define the concept of democracy in your own words. It does even tell you that this should be in your own words. Again, guys, you cannot just rephrase or paraphrase the source. You have to use your own words. As I said before, that is where studying comes in. So you should walk into the exam knowing all these different historical concepts already. Okay, so let's look at the key ideas in the answer. It's a government for the people, by the people, freedom of the citizens in a country to elect a leader of their choice, a political system that allows for freedom of speech, association, and the press, and any other relevant response. So what they do is they accept any other response as long as it is relevant. It doesn't mean that you have to use the words of the memo exactly as they are. Okay, we call these the marking guidelines. It's just a guide. So if you can use your own words to define those terms, then you will be fine. Okay, let's look at the next question. It says, comment on what you think the words ultimatum to Khrushchev, move those missiles, convey in the context of the in the context of the crisis in Cuba. So again, guys, remember I told you that it's not only comprehension that we are looking for in the source. We are looking at whether you can analyze the source in order to be able to draw your own conclusions. So you need to give your own comment based on what is said in the source. So if we look at some key ideas in your answer here, it's that the Cuban Missile Crisis could only be resolved if the Soviet missiles were removed from Cuba. The ultimatum suggests that the USA, Kennedy, wielded more power than the Soviet Union. Kennedy ordered or warned the Soviet Union to remove missiles from Cuba. It shows Kennedy's intention to go to war with the Soviet Union if the missiles were not removed from Cuba. Again, this is your own understanding, your own conclusion after reading the entire source. What you will find is that these key ideas are not contained in the actual source. Okay, you have to come up with these to show that you are able to analyze the source. Okay, guys, I hope that helped you understand how to analyze your sources and how to answer questions and follow instructions. I will see you after the break. Over to you, Luni.
Thank you so much, Mamsi and Keta. I really do hope that this lesson is giving you all the preps that you need to help you study and help with your exams, guys. So we are going to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We'll see you straight after this. Welcome back from the break, Matrix. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to enter that competition #WazOWinner on our Facebook page, WazOMatrix, and you could stand a chance to win 2 gigs of data. All right, so we've got a question and we'll head straight to it.
Hi, Luni. What steps should you follow when analyzing a visual source? Please also give me some tips on how to write a paragraph.
Thank you for those questions, guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to deal with each question individually, and we are going to use last year's history paper 1 to show you how to answer those questions. Okay, let's move on. So when you're analyzing visual sources, it's very, very important to look at the visual clues. So this is similar to your textual source. Remember before the break we looked at a textual source and we read it, we highlighted the important words, we underlined, and we looked for dates and key figures and all that. So you need to do something similar when you are analyzing a visual source. And guys, remember that visual sources can come as cartoons or photographs, and there are different ways of analyzing each one of those. So let me just tell you the difference. When you're analyzing a photograph, you must know that a photograph captures a moment in time. So sometimes you will see things in a photograph that the photographer did not intend for them to be there. So it doesn't mean that every feature that shows in the photograph is important. However, when you're analyzing a cartoon, you need to remember that a cartoonist thought before they drew a cartoon, they thought about the message that they wanted to convey. So every little detail that is found in the cartoon is very, very important. There is nothing that will be in a cartoon by mistake. So that is what you need to know when you are comparing the two visual sources. In a photograph, there are things that can be there by chance, but you cannot find that in a cartoon. Okay. And then another thing is you have to identify the origin of a source. Just like we did with the textual source, it's very important to know who wrote the source, when it was written, okay? And sometimes they can even give you the reasons why that source was made, okay? You need to study the text in the source. So most visual sources, especially cartoons, will have text, even if it's just one word. That word is a clue to answering a question. It is a clue to conveying a particular message that the cartoonist wanted to convey. Okay, what happens is in some photographs you will not find texts, but in cartoons you will find a lot of text. Okay, you have to look for symbols as well. So symbols can be things like you need to look at the buildings that are there, you need to look at the clothes that people are wearing, because those things can tell you a lot about the context, where this was happening. If you're looking at a war situation, do you see any weapons in this visual source to show that it was a war situation? You need to look at the body language as well, because the body language helps you understand what was going on and how the people were feeling at that particular time when that event was taking place. So please look for all those things. You look at the surroundings. If you see people sitting, what are their surroundings? Because those things will tell you where the event took place. Okay. And then you also need to consider the shape and size of the characters. So this applies more specifically to cartoons. Because again, remember I told you that a cartoon is drawn by a cartoonist to convey a particular message. So if maybe a cartoonist wanted to show that this one leader of a country or this country was a bully, they're likely to show them as very big or show them as evil to show that they were bad people or they had bad intentions. So it's very important to look at all those symbols. Okay. And you need to use your knowledge of the topic in your analysis. Now, if you look at all these things that I've discussed with you, you will see that they don't tell you everything about the event. They are just clues to the event. So again, that is where your own knowledge comes in. It's very important for you to make sense of what was going on based on the visual clues that you see there. Okay, I hope that helps you understand how to analyze a visual source. Okay, so as I said, we are going to use an example from last year's paper just to show you what sort of things to look for in a visual source. So the question is, explain the messages that are conveyed in the cartoon regarding the USA's involvement in the Angolan Civil War. And it says here, this is very important, it says, use the visual clues in the source to support your answer. So if you look at this question, again, remember I told you earlier that the mark allocation is very important. So this is 2 times 2. That means this question is out of 4 marks. So the 2 marks are obviously for the message that you're supposed to give. The cartoon itself does not give the message. It can just give you a caption and then you will see the cartoon. It's up to you to come up with the message based on your understanding and your analysis of that cartoon. And once you've given that message that is conveyed by that cartoon, you then need to support it with the visual clues in the source itself. Okay, so let's look at our example here. So you can see this is a cartoon, and it says, there is the text, as I said before, that it's very important to look at the text. It says, if you liked Vietnam, you'll love this. So already you can see that there is a comparison here between the war in Vietnam and the war in Angola. And you can see the word Angola is written in big letters. These letters are in your face, so you can see. And how can you see that this is a war situation? Okay, you can see a fighter jet there. It's a war situation. And it looks like there is a lot of fire going on in the background as well. So already there is turmoil that is going on here. Okay, but what is very important is this comparison. Because again, you will have read the questions and you should be able to conclude why that comparison was made. Why do you think this cartoonist felt it important to compare what was going on in Angola to what happened in Vietnam? So if you look at this cartoon, it requires your prior knowledge of the Vietnam War. Okay, so again, it goes back to those choices that you have to make when you answer these questions, that you should have studied that section even if you're not choosing Vietnam, but you should have prior knowledge of what happened there, because otherwise you will not be able to see what the cartoonist is trying to say here. Okay, now let's move on to the question to see if you've understood how to analyze the source. Okay, so the key ideas in your answer there, remember I told you that the question was, you have to tell us what the message of the cartoon was, okay, and you need to use visual clues from the cartoon. So the key answers that you can give there are, it shows the United States' secretive and covert military involvement in Angola. It depicts that Angola will be destroyed during the conflict. You can see the bullet holes and bombs and the smoke. Remember, I did circle those things when we were looking at the actual cartoon. And now this is the important one. It states that the war would cost American taxpayers millions of dollars, and it gives a negative perspective. The war would have led to the death of many people. Okay, now guys, remember, these are just the suggested responses. As I said to you, you are using your own words. There are different ways of answering a question like this, as long as you can support your answer with the visual clues from the source. That is what is important. So let's carry on. It states that the CIA and Henry Kissinger were in favor of the USA's involvement in Angola. It suggests that the American experience in Vietnam would be repeated in Angola. Now, guys, remember, I told you when I circled or underlined those words in the actual cartoon that you have to know or have prior knowledge of the Vietnam War to understand why the cartoonist would have used that word in a situation in Angola. So as you can see in this response here, it suggests that the American experience in Vietnam would be repeated in Angola. Even if you don't know all the details of what happened in Vietnam, but it's important for you to see that the cartoonist is making the comparisons. Okay, so that is very important. And then any other relevant response. As I said to you guys, as long as it is relevant and as long as you can support it with evidence from the source, then you will be fine. Okay, I hope that helps you understand how to analyze a visual source. Now, another question was how to answer or write paragraph questions. You have to use relevant evidence. Don't just repeat your note. You are not expected to write everything you know. Okay. And use evidence very effectively in an organized paragraph that shows an understanding of the topic. So what you'll be expected to do is to write a paragraph that will be based on the different sources The instruction will tell you which sources to read in order to write that paragraph. And when you're writing that paragraph, it's also very important to use both the information contained in the sources plus your own knowledge. Because you saw when we were answering the short questions that there were some questions that required use of own knowledge. So please make sure that there is a balance between the two. And please make sure that it is a paragraph. You are not expected to write an essay here, but you are writing a paragraph. Okay. Don't just repeat or rephrase the sources. You have to use your own words. Just like when you were answering those short questions where they were asking for definition or description or analysis, in the paragraph, you're expected to show your understanding of the sources and putting together all that information in your own words. If you just repeat the sources, that means you have not done anything. Okay, you have to show that you have the skills to analyze and then rewrite in your own words. And as I've already said, you have to incorporate your own knowledge. That shows that you understand the context. It shows that you've studied. Do not go over the word limit of 8 lines, about 80 words. Okay, as I said to you earlier, it is a paragraph. It is not an essay. So just make sure that you do not include irrelevant information, because that is what makes the paragraphs longer. It's if you include everything you know about the event. No. Read the instructions and answer the question. That is very important. And then, when writing essays, because again, remember, in this paper one of the questions that you will have to choose has to be an essay question. So, it is very important that you include an introduction, body, and conclusion in your essay. You cannot just write a paragraph. Again, you have to know how to write an essay. And in your introduction, you have to take a stance. If the question is, do you agree? That has to be in the introduction, that you agree. Okay. If the question is to what extent, the extent has to be shown in the introduction. Because if you have not done that, then you have not given a good impression. Remember, the introduction is the first thing that the marker reads. So it has to give a good impression. It has to show them that you have control of the information and you know exactly how you are going to argue. And then you have to repeat the stance you've taken in the introduction. You have to repeat it in the conclusion. It's very important. Don't add irrelevant background information. This is not asking you to write everything you know. It's asking you to focus on a specific question that was asked. Content should not be descriptive. What you are expected to do in an essay is to develop a line of argument. Okay, not just to repeat your notes or your textbook. You have to argue. Okay, and then you have to draw a convincing conclusion. Please make sure you don't change your stance in your conclusion. And it has to be in line with the way that you have argued throughout the essay. That is very important. I hope this will help you succeed in your history paper 1. I wish you all the best. Over to you, Luni.
Thank you so much, Mamsi. Matrix, you've been awesome today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And a shout out to all of our winners who will be announced after the show on the Was a Matrix Facebook page. Well, we'll be back with more revision on your #1 educational channel. But for now, from me, Luni, Keta, and Mamsi, it's a thank you and goodbye.
Siyabangena. Was a Matrix is back and better than ever, with catch-up lessons, revision and learning support on more platforms than ever before. There are great support materials on the DBE Cloud. Find us on television and revise 10 subjects. And if you miss something, relax, Ntwana. Go to our YouTube channel or DSTV catch-up. Need help? Check out Vele, our Telegram-based chat platform where teachers are waiting to help you. Prefer WhatsApp? Send questions or voice notes to our Was a Matrix WhatsApp line. And that's not all. Want to test yourself? Check out the Matric Live app. Hey Matrix 2021, we've got you covered. Confused where to go? Visit the Waza Matrix website at wazaMatrix.co.za. Waza Matrix.